Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Adobe Live. It's so great to see everybody coming into the chat. If you're watching this on the YouTube platform, then please come join us on behance.net/live, where we'll be able to see all of your questions, comments, concerns, and various musings in the chat. I'd love to see everyone in here. Let me know who you are, where you're from, what you do with After Effects. And since this stream is all about easing you in and getting you comfortable with After Effects, then I want to know how comfortable you are with this program. This is something that I use literally every day and have for sort of the last decade. So, my comfort level very high, and I want to make sure that I'm bringing you all along for the ride. This morning, we're going to be making some animated backgrounds. Yesterday, if you were hanging out with us, then we were animating some text, and we can spend forever animating text. We really only scratched the surface in what's possible with that. So today, we're going to be creating some wonderful looping animated backgrounds, really exploring the effects panel, the effects part of After Effects. Oh, so great to see people here. We've got people from, we got Tim from Germany, of course, but we've got people from Iran, Brazil, Washington State, and yeah, that is, it's so great to see people from all over the world. We are broadcasting a little bit earlier in the day here for people who are out on LA time, but I'm out here on the East Coast in fabulous Ottawa, Canada, and, it is a fantastic time to be here on the live stream. So join us for the rest of the day. We have a big day of things planned here. So if we just toggle over to the schedule here, after this, we're going to be on here until about 9 o'clock Pacific time, at which point Voodoo Val is going to be coming on, and we're going to have a little creative challenge, followed up with Jason Levine taking you through some video editing, and then, just a rich full day of activities right after that. So it is fantastic that you've chosen to start your day off here, or if your day's winding down, that's fine too. So like I said, today on the program we are going to be just creating some animated backgrounds. So if you want to open up After Effects and follow along with me, that's great. But if not, it would be great to to see what y'all make from this afterwards. So if you make something using what we talk about here, tweet it at me or tag me on Instagram. I'm at EC Abrams on those platforms. It's just wonderful to see what people create. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and show you where we're going. I know a lot of you out there have indicated that After Effects is a little bit scary, and sometimes it's intimidating when you first open up the interface. What am I supposed to do in here? What do any of these windows mean? So because this is going to be a very beginner-focused stream, then we're going to sort of take it one step at a time, nice and slow. Ask questions in the chat. If you're confused about anything, if there's a direction you want to go with this, then let me know. There are infinite things we can do in After Effects. Your imagination is really the only limit in here, and probably your RAM cache size. That's a joke for other After Effects users. But the idea is, I want you to feel comfortable asking questions. So, it's going to be great. That's right, Tim. We're going to be creating the whole Avatar movie in 90 minutes. Virtual cameras, all the stuff. We're doing it all. So grab yourself a hot beverage and follow along. Loving it. Oh, man. After Effects and I are thinking about getting an apartment together. I love that. It's so good. Well, thankfully, for a long time, I was in a one-bedroom apartment with just After Effects and I. We spent a lot of great time together. So here's what we're going to be creating. We're going to be making some animated backgrounds. This is just the first kind of example that I threw together this morning, sort of very quickly. This undulating color in the background was sort of the first place that my mind went, because that's the first kind of basic thing that we can figure out how to do. And it's going to introduce us to the ideas of effects and of stacking effects on top of each other. And in particular, most of the things that we're going to do today are going to be driven by something procedural. So hopefully the colors come through nicely with the bit rate of the stream and everything, and we are able to make some stuff from that. Now, that being said, we can use the same drivers to create something like this, where we've got some undulating squares. It doesn't have to be weird lines at all. This is totally fine. This comes from the same place. It all comes from the same origin. The same methodology creates both of these looks. So we're going to be diving into sort of the genesis of all of that. So, like I said, if in the chat you ever get lost, if you ever feel confused, ask questions in there and we will try to get you through. Also, if there are any sort of particular looks or particular styles that you want to explore, let me know and we'll try to get there. But let's start it off with a blank project. So it looks basically exactly like yours would look when you begin this process. So I'm going to create a new composition, and sorry, I should back up a little bit. When you open up After Effects, it'll be completely empty. And your panels might not even be in the same place as mine. My workspace might be very different from yours. So over here on this side, this is the project window. Everything that lives in the project is over here. All of our compositions, which hold visual information, that hold layers that will be exported later, those live in here, as well as things we might have imported or have created. Those are going to live in the project window. Now, the other windows that are important are the composition window. This is the space where a lot of the work happens. This is where we move things around. And down here, down here is the timeline, right? This is a great place to look at things over time. So if the composition window is where things happen in space, the timeline is where they happen in time. And then, in particular, today, we want to make use of the Effects and Presets window. If you don't have that one open, you want to go Window. You can call up any window in here. So the Effects and Presets window is open there. And also, I have this little tab here that is the Effects Controls. So when we want to put in effects and presets, when we want to add new things, we go to the Effects and Presets. When we want to alter their properties, we go to the Effects Controls. So if your interface doesn't look like mine, don't worry. You can call up any window here in the window space, and you might need to toggle between the many workspaces. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into it. We're going to create a new composition. You can do this many ways. You can just click here on the Create New Composition button. You can go Composition, New Composition. I'm just going to click this button because I'm pretty old school. And what we're going to do here is create a new comp. Now, it's important to name your compositions, so I'm going to call this Backgrounds. And in particular, I often get a lot of questions about what settings we should have in here. What width, what height, what should these be? Well, when we're talking about backgrounds, it's important that we're making a background that is large enough to cover an area where it's going to go. So for example, if on this project I was creating a background to go behind me, if we were going to replace this, maybe I'm going to green screen the background away, as many wonderful streamers do, then they remove that and they put a different background back there. So what we want to do is create something that's large enough to fit with any footage that we would be using it in, right? Or if this is going to go on Instagram, then this should maybe be square or vertical. So this size is related to where this is going to go. This is going to go, what are we going to do with this later? That's where this is important. So that's where you come up with what these numbers will be. I'm going to just use HDTV, 1080, 24 frames a second. This is one of the most common things you would use for like broadcasts. The frame rate is how many frames per second we see. And I'm mentioning this now because if we start to make things loop, then it's important for us to know how many frames are going on. And then we get into resolution and duration. I'm just going to work with something 5 seconds long, a nice short little loop. Always make this longer than you need and trim it down later though. Okay. So here we go. We got our new composition. Hopefully that works. And seeing Doria in there, really enjoying my layer coloring convention. Staying organized in After Effects is number one. You really want to remain as organized as possible. We're in luck because most of what we're going to do today is actually going to live on a single layer. All right. So we're going to create our layer. We're going to make a new solid. Now, solids are one of the oldest forms of layers here in After Effects. And, solids basically have a size and a color, and that's it. So we can start with that. I'm going to start with, I don't know, maybe just a gray. Let's just start like a 50% gray, nice gray solid. And you see the name updates based on the color that we've put in. And since this is going to be a background, oh, Tim, you got me again. Tim cracks me up on these streams all the time with his fabulous pop culture references. In this case, all the single layers. Yes, all the single layers. If you liked it, then you should have put a ring on it. Single layers. So we're going to click this button that says Make Comp Size, right? And this sets all of these settings to be the same as the frame of the comp that you're putting this in. This is very important for backgrounds and for any element that you think you might want to move or change. Because we've made it the comp size, if we start moving this around, we'll end up seeing the edges of it. So just keep that in mind. For us, it's not going to move at all. This is going to stay right where it is. If in your world you need to move it around, that's totally fine, but we're going to leave this alone. Now, we need to generate something. We need to create something that is going to cover this. Now, if you've never used After Effects before, if you're very new to this process, well, welcome to the Effects and Presets panel over here. We have a lot of effects to choose from, and so we thank you for choosing these. And you'll notice that I probably have many more than other people. I have third-party plugins from Boris FX. I have some things from Red Giant. I have some things from all over the place in here. But when you're just starting out, what's vanilla, what's in After Effects is totally great. What we're going to do is we are going to look for something that I call fractal noise. Well, I don't just call it that. Everybody calls it that. And it is in the Generate folder of effects. Okay, so all these things have little families, right? So these effects have little families, and generate effects generators are going to create something in the scene. They're going to make something. Now, we can make all kinds of things, and we probably will. We're probably going to touch a lot of these today. But I'm going to start with the fractal noise, all right? So you can just get a fractal on there if you want. But I'm going to grab the fractal noise, which actually lives in the noise and grain space. So noise and grain, again, is something that's going to fill the frame with information. So fractal noise, here we go. We're going to drag the fractal noise out. Before I do, I want to have a nice little look here. Look next to the effects. If any of them have this little icon here, these are GPU accelerated effects. If you have a nice beefy GPU in your machine, you're going to be happy about that. So we drag it out onto the layer. That's one way of doing it. You can drag it out onto the layer here in the composition or onto the timeline, and it'll apply it, right? Now, right now it looks like a bunch of clouds. And if you wanted a bunch of clouds, congratulations, you have your clouds. And it also doesn't do anything. It just sits there and bees clouds, which is not exactly the look we're after. That's not great. But adjusting all the effects up here, with this effect alone, we can make it look like all kinds of things if you want. So for example, the easiest thing to understand about it is the contrast. If we're going to increase the contrast, it becomes more contrasty, less contrasty, right? Or the brightness. If you make it brighter, it gets more white and gets more dark, right? Easy ideas about those, okay? Overflow, let's not worry about that today because we want to keep it simple today. But now we get into the transform situation. If the clouds look like this, yes, run away. This is very dangerous looking clouds. So we can get into the transform here, and we can do things like rotate the clouds. Look at them rotating. We can scale them up, scale them down, right? So we can get it nice and grainy. We can make it nice and big. So these are things we can alter about this fractal noise. Minecraft stone, Hudson is saying. Yep, some solid fractal noise. You may find that fractal noise is the basis for a lot of things. A lot of things happen based off of fractal noise. And you know, Hudson, I'm going to write down. I'm going to write down so I don't forget. Minecraft stone. Because later in this we're gonna do a little Minecraftiness in this. So spoiler for later. Okay, then we get down into things like subsettings, where we're able to sort of scale elements of what's happening in here. What this is it's a bunch of math. I know it looks very visual, but this is just math, right? And what we're doing is applying a formula to create this stuff. And which formula we're using is down to the fractal type and the noise type, right? So for example, I change this to block. Doesn't it already look interesting? Or I change it to spline, or I change it to linear, right? So these are all different. Some of the changes are a little bit more subtle than others, but some of them are more noticeable. So what's the difference between basic and dynamic? This looks a lot more bubbly. How about what's the difference between dynamic and cloudy? Ooh, well, you'll notice that some settings don't work as well for the others. You have to kind of tone them down a little bit. So based on the formulas, things are going to change about this. So if you play around with fractal noise, you are going to want to get comfortable with all the different ways you can use it. This one effect just explodes out into so many things. But the one element of this, let me collapse all these. Sorry for harming you with all of these settings. The thing I want to do is to change this thing's evolution. Now, because this is all based on math, if we just start changing some of the numbers, you notice it starts to undulate and change over time, right? Look at it go. Chill. Nice. All right. So we can keyframe, and we talked about keyframing yesterday, that when we keyframe this stuff here, then we are able to change it over time. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but basically any property you see that has this stopwatch behind it can be keyframed. So all the keyframes will live down here on the timeline, which is great. And if you twirl into something on the timeline, notice we have this transform. The transform properties are common to all layers. All layers have these same transform properties. And once you apply an effect to something, you get an effects bin. You get a category of effects down here. You can twirl into that. You can twirl into the fractal noise. I'm going to bring this up a little bit so that you can see everything that's going on down here. And you'll notice these are the same. This and this, same. And everything that's represented up here can be represented down here, okay? So now what we want to do is start to keyframe things. So what we're going to do is we are going to keyframe the evolution. And I'm going to click on the stopwatch so it sets a keyframe. And at 4 seconds, the evolution is being expressed in terms of rotational information, so degrees. So I'm just going to set this first number to 1. That means 1 spin around the dial. That's what that means in this context. We're doing 1 spin around the dial, and then you can go like, 90 degrees or more, but we just want to go 1 spin around the dial. Now, the idea is that what we're going to do with this is that we are going to take this thing and we're going to use this to form the basis for a nice, pleasing looping background, right? That's where we want to be going, okay? So if we want this to be looping, then we need the first and last frame to be exactly the same. How are we going to do that? All right. So people are asking in the chat, can we apply these effects and do some examples of what we can do with it? Absolutely. Coming up next. So with this evolution going, now I'm going to twirl into the evolution options, and I'm going to click this button here that says cycle the evolution. Now what that means is that if we run around that 1 cycle, right, then the first and last frames are the same. It means that 360 degrees and 0 degrees are the same image. Now, how do I know that? Here's a little tip from me to you. If you click this little button here, the Take Snapshot button, you want to, oh goodness, that made a terrible loud noise. I hope that didn't get picked up too much on the microphone. Then you click on the button next to it, the Show Snapshot. You're going to see what you just took a picture of, okay? Now, if you roll back to the beginning and I start hitting that button, nothing's changing. Oh, it changes a little bit. It changes a little bit. But they're pretty equivalent images. So the first and last images are now the same, right? So if I were to hit N and set my work area to this, and then I RAM preview it, as we watch, and I should zoom in here, as we watch this play through, it's hard to notice the seam. When does the seam actually happen, right? So it's rolling through, and there you go. Got some good questions in the chat. We've got Dorina asking, how is it that in the timeline is in his frames, is that frames of the seconds? So what we're looking at on the timeline in this view here, right? These little numbers up at the top indicate the number, the second number, right? How many seconds have gone by. So here at the start, we're at 0. And also pay attention to over here in this corner. This readout tells us like 0, 0:00:00, right? I'm going to go move ahead one frame, and you'll notice that the number there has gone to 1, okay? And then 2, and 3, and 4, and so on, 22, 23, 1. Oh, what? Sorry, that's not how counting goes. So 21, 22, 23, 24, because we have 24 frames a second. That's why that 1 here is now 1 second. If we zoom in, let's zoom in very far, very close on the timeline. As you zoom in on the timeline, you can see the frames. You can see the little frame units. We're basically changing the way we count, right? And so hopefully that makes sense in terms of what's happening on the timeline. Now, because this next little bit is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit tricky. So bear with me. Remember how we said the first and last keyframe, the first and last frame here are the same. These are the exact same. Well, if we were to render this and loop it, right? If we were to run this in a loop on Instagram or somewhere, well, we would have 2 frames that are exactly the same right next to each other. The first frame, this one, and the last frame, this one, are the same. So there would be a little hiccup, right? There'd be a little oopsie, because people would start to notice on a long enough timeline that every so often 2 frames are duplicated. Now, if the speed is slow enough, people don't really notice it. But as a general thing you want to consider is if you simply shorten your work area by one frame, then this frame, the next frame, would be this one, which we know is the same as this first one, right? So that creates a seamless loop by removing the 1 frame here. Alternatively, you can just take this keyframe and push it forward by 1. That will cause, so the next frame is going to be this, and we know that that is equivalent to this. So, the next frame, we'll start it over and we'll be fine. So that's my little spiel about looping for now. We'll come back to that later. We were talking about this is our base. This is not what we want to look at. I don't want to look at this gray malaise. I want to feel good about myself today. I want to have a just calm, chill, vibrant time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start layering more effects on top of this. And we do that by simply going to our effects over here and start adding some. So I'm going to add a Gaussian blur. Again, more math. If you love your Gauss, this is the place to go. This is going to make things blurry. The higher we make this number, the blurrier everything becomes. Oh, it's really blurring out. Whoa. All right. So we're blurring this stuff out. And again, this is another GPU accelerated effect. So we get to enjoy a lot of good blurriness. So here we go. Now things are getting blurry. Okay. But it's not quite the look that I'm after. Now, this slider stops at 50, but you can go to 100. You can get real blurry. And in particular, you would probably want to hit repeat edge pixels. Now, repeating the edge pixels, you can kind of see that over here at the edge, things are not great. That's not as blurry, right? So we want to make sure we click repeat edge pixels so we get it right out to the edge. Now, with the blur applied, you might start to think about modifying underlying effects. There can be a lot of back and forth whenever you're creating these kinds of looks. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I think I'm going to increase the scale a little bit because I want these blobs to be a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to increase the contrast a bit. What I'm doing from a kind of methodology perspective is that I'm trying to get a good balance of dark patches and light patches. Okay, I want to see blackness, I want to see whiteness. All we're doing at this stage is creating information that other effects are going to latch onto and convert. Effects are often a lot of creating, and we are going to be using so we're either going to be creating, or we're going to be converting, or we're going to be manipulating things. So that's kind of what effects are doing. They might be generating something new. They might be modifying what they're put on top of. Okay, so fractal noise generated, and then Gaussian blur modified. Okay, so those are the two things that are going on. So that's kind of the idea that we're getting at. Yeah. So, and another thing I'll say in the chat, there is kind of about a 15-second delay or so between me reading the answer, or reading the question, and then getting back to you. And I'll say also, if you're watching this on the YouTubes, if you're checking this out on YouTube, then you should come on over to behance.net/live so I can see your chat. I can only look at one chat at a time, as well as the After Effects screen and the camera. So now we have this undulating patches of black and white. Okay, great, good for us. Well, what are we then going to do with that? Okay, we need an effect that's going to take that information and turn it into something nice. Okay, and of course, the one that I want to talk about is called Colorama. Okay, now I'm going to plomp color. Oh, look at this! It's already doing something weird. Okay, and so as we go. As you can see, we've already created something very strange, haven't we? Haven't we created something strange? We now have this looping situation. I'll just click that. Where we can enjoy this thing going through. Now, in the chat, Brandon is asking how, what's the difference between Gaussian blur and Gaussian blur legacy? That's a good question. So it's in the obsolete bin. The first thing you'll notice is that it is not GPU accelerated even a little bit. So you may find that it is a lot more machine intensive, and that it is not as efficient for your machine, and the quality not as good, right? So that's kind of where we're at with the differences between them. It's a lot of back-end coding stuff often, but whenever you find a legacy version of something and a new version, I highly recommend kind of sticking with the newer version, just because it's going to save your machine. The little machine isn't going to get as hot. And in After Effects, we often layer on a lot of things on top of each other. We're keeping it real basic today, though. We're keeping it nice and chill with. Might only layer like 4 things on here, but you can imagine that in one composition, 50 layers, 10 effects on each, things are getting pretty spicy. So think about how that might play out, and just remember, you want to see this little GPU accelerator. Seeing that little tick makes me very happy. Okay, so Colorama. This is the quintessential converting effect that teaches us quite a lot about inputs and outputs. So Colorama, breaking it down, we've got the input phase here. And that's basically saying, okay, I'm going to look at what's going on already. I'm looking at what came before me here in the stack, and that's my input. I'm going to look at the intensity of what's going on. I'm looking at the pixels, I'm going to look at the intensity of each pixel, and I'm going to do something with that. And so with the input phase, we're looking at intensity, and we could use red, green, blue. We could use hue. If we used hue, you notice nothing happens because there's no hue information on this. This is just black and white. No hues. No hues here. No hues, no Eugenes. No Griseldas, but plenty of intensity. Very intense. Intense. So we're going to click it to intensity. Lightness, you could use lightness as well, but let's stick with intensity, right? And what we're going to do is we are going to just leave it there. You can do a lot of combining of phases together. You can be adding things, subtracting things. You can get wild with this. But let's just say, hey, Colorama, look at how black or white something is, and we're going to remap that. Now, right now, we're remapping it to a rainbow. So that's a great thing to remap anything to. And we end up with this situation, right? And if you're happy with that, that's great. But you can go into some presets and we can start playing around. Let's just go to RGB, right? And we end up with this kind of a look. Or maybe we look at the solarized red, right? Ooh, how do we feel about this? Or maybe we can go into some of the bottom line things here. Skink, I don't know what that means, but it could be this. I don't like that. That's making me sad. We're going to go to sunset, though. Now, you'll notice that this wheel is a little bit different for all of them, right? And this wheel is where we are remapping that input phase onto, okay? So if we go with a nice smooth one, this is a nice smooth transition all the way around. Oh, that's so ugly. I don't like that. We're going to go with fire. No, fire doesn't have that smooth ramp. Okay. We're going back to the hue cycle. So you'll notice we have... a skink is a lizard. That makes sense. But so we have this input cycle and output cycle. Now, we can shift that phase if we want, right? We're basically running the numbers over each other. Oh boy, I like that already. So if you want to get a little bit psychedelic, who doesn't? I'm going to add a keyframe here. I'm going to put a keyframe over here, put this to 1 because it goes around in a loop. This should now loop. So look for these things that loop around. And suddenly we've created the backgrounds of that 70s show. Congratulations, we've done it, right? And we've created this weird looping, undulating situation. That's a little bit extreme for me. I want to chill. I want to have a chill day. So I don't think we need all of these colors. I'm just going to start removing some. Boop, pop, beep. And now we've got these colors. Okay, now we're getting a little bit more chill, I think. We could even get down to just 2. Get down to just 2 colors. Now, we do end up with these kind of like lines, right? These defining lines where one thing becomes the next thing. And if that's the look you're into, that's totally fine. But it may mean that you need to get even blurrier with this, right? You need this to be even less defined than before. So that's something that that might be sort of important to think about. Anyway, so with these things undulating about, then we are going to be we're going to just be modifying these. Now, one thing I'm going to say is that even though we're dealing with a lot of numbers, we're dealing with a lot of specific kind of programmatic, procedural thoughts here. This is a lot more like painting, where you're going to be pushing one direction, pushing the other direction, starting from broad strokes, refining into the details, right? So that's kind of where we're at with this. I don't really like the... I'm going to take that phase shift off just because it's a little bit weird. There we go. Now we are getting where we want to go. And we're going to try to soften if we can. It is very, very jellyfish-like here, which I think is great. What you can do is you can start adding in more points to try to widen the spread on some of these, like this. So if you notice that this here is too harsh, if you have these like harsh lines, which is what I'm trying to work out, trying to span these a little bit. You can just click and then start pinching those around. Anyway, so we end up with this kind of situation. Anyway, so from those humble beginnings, we've now ended up with this. I'm going to take you to, we're going to go to, this example here at the beginning, the one that we, put a GIF out in the world about. So one of the big differences is the subtlety and the softness of that colorama phase. And let's say you have to play around quite a bit to kind of get things where you want them to be. There are a lot of tutorial and instruction out there that simply give you a recipe, and I would recommend really deviating from that. To really come to grips with what's happening in this program, you really need to explore the space quite a bit more and make sure that you are gaining a deeper understanding of what these effects are doing and how things are interacting and why they're doing what they do. Okay, so that's my spiel about that as we move on. Speaking of, remember at the beginning we talked a little bit about how would we make something like Minecraft bricks? And you know I gotta jump on those Minecraft bricks. If someone talks about something in the chat, I want to try to do that. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new one. I'm gonna call this Minecraft bricks. Look at my keyboard here. There we go. So we're gonna start the same way. New solid, great. Make it the comp size, good. Start us off with fractal noise. Okay, film and grain, fractal noise. With you so far. Increase the contrast a little. Okay, go into the transform. Increase the scale a little. Okay, maybe this is close to where we want to be. Now, how do we want to modify these things? Oh, Philip, you're asking how do we delete the little arrows from the color wheel? We can delete little arrows by clicking on them and dragging them off the wheel. Boop, pop, beep, and they just pop away. If you want to add a wheel, then you can just click on it, and you'll come up with this old-time dialog box, or maybe you won't. Oh no, yes, you can see that. Good, and then it'll create a new one of those. So we end up with that situation. Okay. Sorry, I jumped away from Colorama too quick. There's a little button down here. Give that a click, and you'll notice that the gradient goes away. So it's no longer gradiated between these areas, which is great because you can make this kind of cartoony look to things. You end up with this kind of topographical kind of look to things. So just give that a ponder. Okay. And we're going to revisit that idea in a bit. So we were talking Minecraft, we were talking bricks. Okay. Is there an effect that can make this look like bricks? Well, we call it the mosaic. So this is in the stylize family of effects. Bring the mosaic out. So look at that, things getting real pixely up in here. So I'm going to just dial this in. Horizontal blocks 16, vertical blocks 9. Now this is a 16 by 9 composition, right? So this thing here is 16 pixels by 9 or the ratio is 16 by 9. So if I have 16 blocks by 9 blocks, I have a bunch of squares. Nice squares. If I wanted more squares, maybe I go 32 by 18. Gives me smaller squares, right? So it's got this nice pixelated thing. Now, I'm going to say that you can apply the mosaic to anything and make it look pixely like this, right? That's just how it does. Now, if you want the colors to be sharper, if you want them to interpolate a little better, right now the mosaic is kind of taking an average of what it finds in there. So it's like, the average of this square is this. The average of this square is this. If you do sharp colors, it skews it to be a lot sharper, more contrasty. So we've done it. We've made this kind of pixely, contrasty situation, right? Now, again, what did we say about how do we animate the fractal noise? Well, we animate its evolution. We change its evolution options. So we just cycle the evolution. We keyframe the evolution. Let's say around 4 seconds. This is going to go around 1 time. So it'll be exactly the same. And what does it look like? It looks like this. So, if I was starting a Twitch channel and I needed a background behind me that looked a little bit like some Minecraft creeper stuff, maybe I would do this. Oh, but wait, this is not the right color. No. This is not the color we want. Do we want to go back to Colorama? Do we want to go through all that hassle of Colorama? I don't know. It seems a little bit heavy for what we're doing. I want to introduce you to your best friend, the color correction tint effect. Again, tint, GPU accelerated. Gotta love these GPU accelerated effects. Shout out to the After Effects team for doing this stuff. So tint is doing a very similar job to Colorama, but quite a lot more simplified. So all we're going to do is we're going to say, what color should I remap black to be? Well, I think now that I'm on that Minecraft creeper vibe, I'm going to put it down here to a nice dark green. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to put it to a lighter type of green. Maybe like up in here. Is that where that needs to be? I'm going to have to Google what color creeper is. We're going to do that. Okay. So we end up with this. And someone's saying they see a face in it. That is creepy. Now, Michelle, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's say, okay, this happens a lot. We would call this like synchronicity, where just from a random sampling of things, because this is all math, this is all procedural, right? We haven't done enough to really say where things should be. And if you don't see the face, it's we got these 2 eyes over here, and this is kind of the creepy mouth down here. So, so what we want to do, we might end up with a random combination from the fractal noise that we're just like, I'm not feeling it. Fractal noise, I'm not feeling it. You're doing it wrong, fractal noise. You can, because we have full control over this world, whatever we want to do in After Effects, we can do it. We just twirl into this here, part of the evolution options of the fractal noise, right? Evolution options, twirl into that. And this here, it says random seed. Now, if we start changing that, the whole thing changes. Each random seed is new and different, okay? That's because randomness is, in computer terms, not always truly random, right? We have to start with something. And these seeds are what we start with. And if we cycle through them until we find a combination we like, maybe there's fewer faces in this one, right? So that's something to think about, right? Is that, we most likely would need to end up doing that kind of a thing, often if you're using a fractal noise. So there you go. You end up with this kind of a look. So hopefully that's our Minecraft diversion for today. If there are any other quandaries on that kind of a move, let me know. But the idea is we start with the fractal noise, we add the mosaic to turn this into a bunch of squares, and then we are tinting the squares. And honestly, we can actually switch the order of tinting and such if you wish. Sometimes the order is important, but just remember that we are fractal noising to create the base, and then we are altering it with the mosaic. So rather than altering with the Gaussian or Gaussian blur, we are making it more defined, more rigid. In the box, get into the box. and then we're tinting that, right? Not as advanced as Colorama. We don't need to go that far. We just tint it, and that's what we end up with. So something that, I'm going to dial this back to 16 by 9, get real pixely with it. And so that is, again, something nice. So is it possible, here we go. Is it possible to use fractal noise in Colorama as an alpha mask to define the border of a puppet? It's an interesting question. Define the border of a puppet. What kind of puppet? Are we talking like footage of a puppet, or are we talking about like a drawing of a puppet kind of thing? So let me know on that, Massimiliano, and we will. No, that's not how you pronounce that. Oh, you have such a. Let's see here, Massimiliano. There we go. So yeah, let me know what kind of puppet and what kind of file you're working from. There's a lot of things we can do with fractal noise. But we are actually going to dive into a cousin of the fractal noise, the turbulent displace. So we're going to get into that coming up next, because quite frankly, I don't want you to think that everything has to be fractal noise starting. I don't want to get you into that. So we're gonna do it up. We're going to do it up grid style here. What if we wanted to do something a little gritty? Let's do that. So we're going to create a background that's more grid based, right? Now we keep making more solids, but we don't have to necessarily do that. We can just drag them out of the project and put them on our timeline. So how do we want to start with this? How do we want to start here? I want to start with a gradient. Okay. Maybe you just want a nice big old gradient back there, and it is a gradient ramp I'm after. There's a question here. Is there a formula for keyframing in general? I don't think so. There are certainly many methods. So Dagny is asking about keyframing. We talked a little bit about in this video, but no, I don't think there are certainly certain methods when it comes to keyframing. Keyframing as a concept, you might say like, oh, I'm animating on the 2s. Oh, I'm animating on the 3s, right? That's a traditional animation concept that implies a formulaic method to it. But in this case, what we're doing is we're only using keyframes to create looping backgrounds. So there kind of is a certain math to it that you need basically the first and last frames to be exactly the same, and then you take a frame away, and then that creates a seamless loop. So that's kind of the formula we talked about a little bit, but it's all down to what you're trying to achieve. So like I said, in this, we've got this gradient ramp. Okay, gradient ramp is another great place to start with a background. Gradients are nice and pleasing objects. People like a good gradient. I can drag these two handles around and create our gradient from one to the other if I want. I can make a radial gradient if I desire. I'm going to keep it on linear. And I'm going to make it a little bit less of a contrasted gradient. So I'm going to set this one maybe around here. This one can be nice and light down here. Now, I'm not sure if the encoding of the stream is doing it justice. But if you're to export this, you would end up with what we call banding. Banding is the difference between these pixels isn't big enough. There's maybe only 10 colors. Maybe there's only 24 colors from one side to the other. And so it's created these bands. Do let me know in the chat though if you can see the bands I'm talking about or not, or because I can try to make this a lot more noticeable. I think here we go. Now we can see the bands. So I'm applying a levels here just so that you can see that there is no color information between each of these, right? So if I were to export this, if I exported it as like an H.264 or whatever it is, when someone plays it back, they might notice all of this banding that's happening. I don't want that. I don't want to see that banding. I don't want, do not see the bands. Yeah. Because in certain encoding situations, you wouldn't notice it, right? But if you do find it noticeable and unpleasant, right, then we have this thing here called ramp scatter. And so what we do is we start increasing the ramp scatter, and what it's doing is it's adding grain into those areas, right? So by scattering this up to the maximum of 512, we make that go away by crunching that down. And LK is asking in the chat, can we show how to do great color correction? That is a good idea for another stream. And if you check out some of the sort of video masterclass stuff, there's definitely some great videos on Adobe Live. They've covered some fantastic, not only color correction, but color grading as well that goes down. So definitely check those out. And who knows, we may get into it on future streams here. But today we got to focus on these backgrounds. So that's the banding situation. If you encounter banding, that's one way to make it go away. It does make things a little bit grainy, is the only thing. But banding is simply the result of a limited amount of color information, right? So there's not really much else you can do. You're either going to break up that color or add more colors, I guess, which you could do. That's fine. But ramp scatter is usually the way to go for me. So. Tea time for Evan. All right. So we've got this gradient. We've put a nice subtle gradient back there. We were talking about grids. So I want to apply a grid to this. We're just going to generate grid. Oh, look at this. It's our old buddy. It's our old buddy generate family. We're back. So, boop. And then, would you look at that? The grid has literally replaced we've literally replaced what we were doing before with this grid, and it's overwritten it. The generator has been applied right over top of that thing we were doing. And Jordan is saying you can address this through the bit depth of the comp. Bit depth of the project, absolutely. You can go from 8 to 16 to 32 channels, which is maybe a bit more... Maybe a bit deeper than we want to go today necessarily about bit depth and bit rates and stuff like that. But yeah, you can definitely increase your bit depth on a per project basis down here, which will be more intensive on your machine. So just be aware of that. But literally doubling each time. But that's totally fine. And in the chat. Can you make the glitch style on this background using displace? Spoilies. It's almost like you know exactly where I'm going with this, and so we're getting into it. You get into those bits pers channels. Oh man! So we've got this grid, and I wanted to throw like a little graph paper situation out here. All right. So in the effects and controls, what we're going to do is I'm going to take the color of the grid and I'm going to make it sort of like a darker gray in this area. Maybe like a subtle blue tint to it. Okay. Now, this generate effect has overwritten everything. So you might be thinking, oh no, it's ruined. I ruined it. Not true. Not true. In fact, down here, if you look at blending mode, we can change that from none. We can change that up to normal. And now, the grid is the only thing that's being generated. And so that's now being generated on top of other things. But this has an internal blending mode, so it can blend with the other elements. So you might go with a multiply, you might go with a hard light, you might go with the soft light. You've got options. You've got options. So I'm going to do soft light just because I find this very appealing. Oh, hiccups now. And I might bring that border down a little bit. You know what? This is for demonstrational purposes, so we're going to keep it a little chonky. You can also invert the grid if you so desire. If you want to invert it, you go right ahead. But with this grid, I'm going to be honest with you, folks. Grids are kind of boring, I'm not super excited about grids. hard to get down with grids. It's like they're trying to put us in a box. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to add a little bit of organic wobbliness to this. So the next family I want to introduce you to, hi, welcome. I'm going to introduce you to the distort family. And we are going to drop on here a turbulent displace. Would you look at that? Things are getting weirder already. So I'm happy with that first ramp. I'm happy with that grid. Now we've got the turbulent displace going on. Look at what we have wrought, folks. This is wild. In fact, on that grid, I want this to be more pronounced. So I'm going to just set this to normal so we can really see what's going down with this. So the turbulent displace, similar to the fractal noise, is applying math to warp what's going on here. All right. And how is it getting warpy? Well, we're using the turbulent, but we could use bulge. We could use twist. We could use smoother versions, or we could be just simply doing. Someone was asking about glitches. Let's get glitchy. New phone, new displace. Oh my goodness. So we can just start messing around with this, increasing the amount, because someone was talking about how do we glitchify this? Well, turbulent displace is a great way to do that, you know. I'm going to go ahead down here with pinning. Turbulent displace has this interesting thing that you can notice almost right away here in terms of how this is behaving. What's happening here? Well, we talked about some effects have repeat edge pixels. Well, some of them have pinning of edge pixels. If I remove the pinning from this, it is actually going to start ripping the edges of my stuff on here. And, you know, the trouble is that, you know, now things are getting real wacky around the edges of this. So if this is going to be a background, you may have to scale this up so that those nasty parts aren't seen. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. Okay. Now, someone's asking, is it possible to define the area of disruption? Where is getting disrupted? There are a few ways. To do that. Now, turbulent displace may not be the effect for this. In fact, we would probably want to use the displacement map for this. How to address best. I'm going to show you one method, and let me just first take us from horizontal. I'm going to take us back to turbulent. Oh, that's too turbulent. Oh, turbulent. And I'm going to get that pinning back on. Let's put that pinning back on. And I'm just going to dial in these settings just so that I can be thrilled with this. I just kind of want this to be a little bit wavy, a little bit weird, like this. So the question was, is it possible to define the area of the disruption or of the distribution here? And I think the idea is that you want to control where it's getting messed up. And so let's see. Oh, no, wait. Oh, I'm so sorry. That was related to your previous question about fractal noise. Main color, for example, green, remains constant. Will the contours merge in red and blue with fractal noise? It's definitely possible. Fractal noise would be sort of the overlay, and then you would want to clamp where that is happening to your image. So you'd probably need to use a bunch of other effects to rein that in. But I want to continue on. I want to continue on with backgrounds. I'm here to talk about backgrounds, folks. So and we don't have too much time. Oh, we're running out of time. There's still a few more things that I wanted to get to. So we've got our turbulent displace on our background. Now we want to animate these, right? But wouldn't you look at this? I got that cycle evolution going on. I got the exact same things that we saw in fractal noise. I am doing it. So I'm gonna animate the evolution here. Again, we talked about, someone was asking about the keyframing formulae, right? And so we can have this animated, oh boy. So that's kind of going, that's waving all over the place. It's kind of disturbing, but yes, we can use masks to determine where this is happening. So I'm just going to draw a mask over here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that things are looking weird. Yeah, very weird. In fact, that's because of the order in which things are applied. So these effects are being applied after the mask has been applied. So you'll notice that this mask is getting real weird. Now, you can twirl into the layer here, into the effects, twirl into turbulent displace, go down to the bottom, and you see compositing options. Oh, I'm down at the very bottom of my screen. Hold on. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. So we do this. And I'm going to click this plus sign on compositing options. And this has basically said that this will only be happening inside this mask, right? So only inside this mask shall we see turbulent displace, and that's indicated over here. So you see this little icon here? That is saying that effect is now being masked, and up here, that effect is now being masked. So you know that that is what's going on. So the masks are making that happen. As well with the masks, like with any mask, you can start to feather the edges out, which has kind of a weird effect, right? If you want kind of a tapered disruption, this ain't it, right? This ain't it. I don't necessarily, today's maybe not the day to jump into the displacement map effect. We'll have to save that for another day because we start getting into some even more, I would say, advanced methodologies. And I think today we want to keep it a little bit basic. But definitely Google up. There's some great tutorials about displacement map. That might be the one to get you there because you can define using another layer where things should be happening, based on their values up and down. So hopefully that makes sense. But we were talking about this undulation, this undulating background here. So it is moving along, it is grooving, it is doing it. So what we wanted to do is make sure that this loops. So we were using the evolution options here to have this going, right? And that is working out. So, well, if you have to bow out of the stream early, that's totally understandable. We all got stuff to get onto. But if you miss any of these streams, we love having you here and, when you can. But definitely check out the replay if you miss any of it because they're saved on Behance Live for all time and all space. So now we've got this looping, undulating background. Good for us. Congratulations. We've done it. Very nicely using this. So that is something to think about if you want to have an undulating background like this. And this could be applied to anything. We've applied it to the grid mostly so that it kind of makes sense, right? So like, oh yeah, I get it. I get how that's going. But you can apply it to all kinds of things, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a grid. I'm going to duplicate the gradient ramp here and I'm going to make a ramp that is maybe just a little bit more colorful. Just a little bit more colorful. Something like this, right? Now it's kind of hard to tell what's going on with our little subtle waves going on here, right? So what you can do, what I would recommend you do anyway, is to go ahead into your turbulent displace. We can really increase the amount here. And as long as we don't break the edge, we're breaking the edge. So see these tears that are happening? These tears are because the amount is so high. The amount is so high that it is causing these ripples to happen, which is not what we want. We just want things to be undulating. So you're going to have to check through and make sure you don't make any holes. Tim in the chat sees my true colors shining through, which is great, which I love. So you can see now we've used that turbulent displace to get some of this gradient bleeding into other areas of the gradient. So you see how that's working it up. Now, someone was asking a little refresh on how we did the loop, right? And it's quick to cover again, just so that we know. We're using these effects evolution properties, right? So if you go into the turbulent displace, if you go into the fractal noise, you'll find this evolution option here. We are able to turn on cycle evolution, and then if we just simply take this for one trip around its evolution, we come back to the exact same frame at 1 as we do at 0. And so then we simply need to place those two keyframes and bump the keyframe a little bit. And then we have this wonderful, very subtly undulating background. How calming and wonderful is this? We can just sit here and bliss out staring at this softly undulating background. Ah, so nice. Now, something else I want to say is that you can amplify this up. If you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, what I'd really like for this to do is to alter how many revolutions, like how much speed it takes to make this happen, then you can start to define that here in the cycle. So something to think about. Okay, so now we get to the part of the program. If you have any kind of sort of requests for things to get into, I am all ears. But I did have a few other thoughts that I wanted to get into and to explore with you, because we are talking about backgrounds. We are talking about little simple tricks you can do to start animating things and start creating and filling the space of your work area. Oh, and Gabrielle is asking, how do I add the tools, including the mask tool, to my workspace? Well, that's interesting. So they should be by default up here, up on the top, right? That's where all the tools live. If you don't see them, make sure that you go Window Tools. So hopefully that will get you all the tools you require. Now, this has all been very procedural, which is fantastic. We love a good procedural thing because it allows us to play around and quickly get things happening in this space, right? So I want to look at what else we can generate in here. What other things in the generate space could we be creating? Or what about clipping a video inside of text? So is that the idea that you want, rather than using something as a background, you could use it to seem like it's inside the text, right? It's easy one. I got you, Noel. I'm gonna hook you up with that. So how do we do it? How do we make that happen? Well, all footage behaves exactly the same. I know we're getting a little bit off track here, but once we've created our background, we can use it as footage. So this actually works out very well with what I wanted, some of the things I wanted to talk about. So we're going to talk about background usage now. This is kind of where we were going anyway. And I'm going to take my grid and drop it out here. And of course, we have since converted our grid to not be a grid anymore, but and done so many terrible things to it. Let me just dial back a little bit. Okay, here we go. So now we're in this comp that I've called background usage, and you can just drag your background into this space. Now I'm going to create some text that's going to go over top of that. Text. All right. And we're going to go Azo Sans black. And in fact, let's just make it like this. Okay. So we got some text, right? And so text on top of background, cool. But what about background inside text? Can we do background inside text? Oh, you better believe we can. So what I want to do is I'm going to take, let's see, what's a nice one to use? Which of these? Oh, the Minecraft blocks? I don't know. This weird one? Sure. All right. So this comp that we called backgrounds, right? And we're going to bring backgrounds under the text. Okay. Now, this could be any layer. This could be a video layer. This could be an image layer. This could be whatever kind of layer you want, right? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what it is. Okay. And then a directional blur, sharp edges. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this thing called a track matte. If you don't see the word track matte, just go ahead and click toggle switches and modes, and then you should see track matte. And we're going to say alpha matte of text. So now the text is defining where we can see that thing. Okay. And so that footage, that layer, that composition seems to now live inside that text. So hopefully that makes sense about how you might make that happen. Oh, folks, we're making such GIFs here. we're being a bunch of big old GIF makers up in this space. It's so good. And so that's kind of what's going down. Now, LK is asking about, what about making the text wave around? Well, we talked about how all these things can be applied to whatever layer. So if you want to have a turbulent displace, you want to drop that turbulent displace on the text, hey, you go right ahead. Now the text is doing that too, right? So you can drop these things anywhere, right? It doesn't really matter what the layer is. Effects can live on that layer. So hopefully this kind of makes sense. Now, I don't find that these two styles go together. So I wanted to show a couple more effects that you might find fun. And in particular, one was the find edges. The find edges effect that you can drop on things, which creates kind of a cartoony look. But when you find edges and you find them on rigid things, so for example, this colorama here, right? So colorama, we're basically using four phases to create these 4 zones, all right? Well, then I apply find edges to that, and it finds the edges, and we end up with this beautiful little, what we would call like a topography kind of look. So now I'm happy with that. And again, it's chosen this color, right? And you can invert it. But what I'm going to do is then I'm going to tint that down. So now we end up with this. And now I'm going to stomp on that a little bit. So now if we go back to where we're using that, I'm way more happy with this combination of things. Okay. So what do we got going on here? There are a bunch of questions coming up in the chat here. When we render the animation, will the grid be visible? If you mean this grid that we generated with an effect, yes. But if you're talking about things like the proportional grid or the grid that we use to line things up, no, those will not be visible at all. Let's see, what do we got here? Someone's asking, is it possible to twist the text? If you mean in a 3D context, not really, not especially. You might need a little bit extra, put a little extra English on that one. But there are ways that you can deform the text using various bulges, various effects. So look for anything in the distort family of effects to help you out with how you might mess that around. And Joshua is asking, how do you add a panel that says Evan on it? That was something that my friend and collaborator, Kyle Hamrick, worked up for me. It's a simple little script that adds that word up there. So that's not good. And then the big question, LK is asking, I'm sorry if I miss a lot of questions, they just fly by in the chat, but LK Foundation is asking, where would we use this kind of thing? What types of video would we use this in? Well, we end up using these techniques in a lot of title treatments. We end up using them in a lot of maybe lower thirds, a lot of social ads, because you need social ads need to be created very quickly. So we end up with things that are simple and procedural, things that are visually striking, such as a very patterned background like this is very striking, and this kind of juxtaposition between elements can really help to have elements pop out. Often we see this in a lot of promotional graphics. There's a lot of demand for text on screen kind of things, explainer video. Basically any time that you are working in a space that requires visual interest, then you should consider what you can do with backgrounds in that way. But the other thing to think about is that this background doesn't have to be big. If we were doing a lower third, it might be a little tiny thing, you know, it might be a little element that comes in somewhere else that we observe. right? So, sometimes we use them full screen, sometimes not. The techniques that we use to create these patterns and these shapes and these undulations can serve you well in creating texture for all kinds of elements in After Effects. So that's definitely something to think about. I was going to make sure I didn't miss any key things. Not sure in the chat. So I'm on here for about another 10 minutes. So I wanted to kind of go back, because this is kind of the sort of beginner series. I want to kind of recap where we've been, what we've done, what we've covered, because I know it's been a sort of mixed bag of things, right? And hopefully that works out. But Brandon is asking, make a video about expressions. Well, this is where I would say, if you're familiar with the EC Abrams tutorial channel, which is where you'll find me talking about more of this, we talk about expressions all the time. If you want to see what the schedule for today is, what things you could learn for the rest of today, check out behance.net/live. I do know that there are a lot of great things coming up today. And definitely check out the schedule to confirm what's going on. Lots of creative challenges, a lot of excellent things. Someone wanted to use a parallax effect on this. We could use a camera, sure, or you can really just scale them up and down with the scale if you wish. But I want to recap kind of where we're going. If you wanted to use the camera in this, that's 3D stuff. That's not basic day. That's advanced day. But someday we will get more into the camera. So what are we going to do? We need to recap what happened. So yesterday we just did a bunch of text animator stuff, and then today we started putting backgrounds behind those things. So we learned a lot about generative effects. We learned a lot about building layers of effects and how they impact each other. In particular, we talked a lot about the idea of starting with something called fractal noise. So fractal noise is this great way to generate values, to generate black and white undulating values that you can control and change and modify. And it starts as the basis of a lot of things. So we start with fractal noise, and then we would dial in. We dial in how we want that fractal noise to work. We modify its scale, for example. So we can scale it up and down. We alter its contrast up and down. We make it more or less contrasted. We really get in there and we dial in this stuff. Then we talked about another kind of effect that would modify rather than generate. So we're creating fractal noise and then we're modifying it with something, right? So we're putting another layer on top of it. And in this case, what we did was we modified it by blurring it, by using a Gaussian blur on top of it to make this blurry, right? But in another example, what we did instead was we used a mosaic to make it blocky. So these both start from the same place, but then we add another layer and it becomes something new. So it becomes blocky, it becomes blurry, right? So we can do that. Now, the next thing we did was we took it, we reinterpreted it. So we reinterpret these values. We took them from being black and white values and we made them into colors. And we did that using the colorama effect. Now, the colorama effect is taking inputs that we can define and change and animate and warp, and then converts them into outputs, our desired outputs from those inputs. So working with these procedural things, we had this input of the intensity, how dark, how light something is, and then we were remapping that to some pleasing, real peach aesthetic colors going on here. I want to thank designer Emily Smart for teaching me the word peach aesthetic not too long ago. So this is all possible thanks to the colorama. As we take an input and convert it into a different output, right? And we did this in many ways. We then kind of repeated the same methodology, right? In this block example, we started with noise, right? Just started with noise. Then we added a mosaic. Then we tinted it. And the tint is doing a similar thing to the colorama. It's remapping black values to this color, white values to this number. Get some hearts. Well, thank you, thank you, Adobe Live moderator. I'm glad you enjoyed. So colorama is not just for doing the predator effect, Joel. No, but it can and it do. So then after that, we talked about some other things that we could be applying. So using things like the find edges and the tint in order to create different layered effects. Oh, hey, thank you all so much. It's been so great. I could pick my own colors, of course. That's right. We use the color picker. And then we talked about some other forms of generative things. We talked about the gradient ramp, right? And which gives us nice subtle gradients or harsh gradients. It's up to you. You can be as subtle or harsh as you want. Then we were adding a grid over top of this. So we were adding a generative grid. We talked about how some generative elements will override what's going on, and paying attention to the blending mode down here at the bottom to make sure that these things are working the way we want them to. And then with that grid applied, we then snapped on the turbulent displace. And the turbulent displace behaved almost exactly like the fractal noise. It's creating this loopable, animatable thing that we can put over top of another element. And you know what? You can do this to photos and videos and you can do to anything, all sorts of things. And that is the turbulent displace that we animated in exactly the same way as we animated that fractal noise. Evolution options, turn on looping, send it for a loop. That's all you got to do. Now, finally, the last things that we got into was how do we use them? How do we combine these things? And we can use our backgrounds behind things. And we talked about how we can use them inside things. So we've got examples of all of that going on here. Now, I will say here, where's my camera? Boop. There it is. So the idea is that we can use these things in so many different ways, you know. And Ben Burnett is bringing in the chat here, asking how we would animate in these generators and how we would use them as transitions. Now, transitions, I think, is going to have to be a video for another day, just because there is a lot to get into there. But the main thing is that any property you find on an effect, you can animate. Anything with a stopwatch, you can animate that. So in terms of using things as a transition, you just want to think about going from one value to another and then using that as remapping that to either make something visible or invisible, right? And that's right, we were doing some very trippy things today. We were getting really wild. I want to thank you all for coming and hanging out on the stream with me. This is the start of a big creative day here, big day of streams here on Adobe Live, here on behance.net/live. If you've been watching this on the YouTube, I would really encourage you to come on over to behance.net/live and join in for the rest of the day. I do want to really quickly call up the schedule here just so you can see what we've got going on. Coming up next, Photoshop challenge with Voodoo Val, and then followed by some more editing with Jason Levine. So stick around with your morning with us, because there are a lot of great things coming up. And of course, we got graphic design going on. We got XD Creative Challenge coming up. We've got a design off where two designers will fight for your approval. I love it. So much great programming hanging out with us here. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Hanging out with us here on the stream. So, it's so great. I might be back next week. We shall see. Really depends. If you can't get enough of hearing my voice in your head, then check out the EC Abrams tutorial channel on YouTube. I'm on Twitter at EC Abrams, and where else? Instagram, same thing there. If you make things, if you make stuff on here, if you make things with After Effects, I want to see it. So tweet it at me, get me the link, tag me on Instagram. I want to see those things. I want to see what you make, and we'll see each other around the internet. For now, though, I hope you have a creative and chill morning, and that you hang out with us on the rest of the stream. So I've been Evan Abrams here for Adobe Live, and we will see you around the internet.